Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be an alpha male the right way, with God at the center. The podcast where we're not ashamed or afraid to walk out what we've been called to be. Strong, dominant alpha males. That's what we are, and we don't apologize for it. Today's episode is going to be on interacting with the police. Now, if you've heard the bio before, you'll know that I have been a police officer. I was LAPD, as well as fulfilling other law enforcement capacities. And hopefully I can take that knowledge and share it with you in a useful and informative way. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review of the podcast. If you want to check out something while you're listening or want more content, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. And consider being a patron. You get a lot of cool perks on there. Again, that's goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, we'll put in the bio and then we'll get into the main topic. If you want to skip the bio, you can skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts. Who am I? First and foremost, I am a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic.
So, with today's topic, interactions with police officers. Now, let me start by saying the disclaimer. If you want actual legal advice, go to an actual lawyer. Coming at this from a citizen's perspective and a former law enforcement perspective, having enforced law. Also know that I'm coming at this from an American perspective. And I really appreciate all you patrons from Europe. I really do. I think you kind of put the American patrons to shame on how much you guys support the podcast versus the American listeners, especially probably per capita. But I don't pretend to speak about things I don't know, and I don't know other cultures, and especially other police cultures and how they interact with their police officers and all the nuances thereof. So I'm speaking about American police and American constitutional law and things like that when I speak about this. It may or may not apply to you in other places. I also want to start with this. Police officers are human beings. They're people like any other. You get good ones and you get bad ones. Just like there are good and bad teachers. There are good and bad babysitters. There are good and bad priests. There are good and bad in just about any profession. Whenever you get a large group of people, there will be a vast variance of those people. Some of those people in that group will be evil. Even one of the disciples turned aside and betrayed Jesus. That being said, just because one has a badge, that gives them authority. That does not transform them into a morally upright and upstanding person with good morals. It doesn't do that. Nor does it make one courageous if one is not courageous already. The badge is just a representation of power. It gives them the color of authority, but it does not make them morally better than they were without the badge or stronger than they were without the badge, nor does it just by something being pinned on their chest give them bravery. So understand that. Police are people. There are some very calm ones, there are some very hot-tempered ones, just like any other group of people. And I'll start with some scripture. Give honor to whom honor is due. And you're not giving that individual person honor. You're honoring the badge. You're honoring the authority that the badge represents. Just like there are many motives for people becoming police officers. Some really want to help out the community. Some really see themselves as a public servant, as serving their fellow man and serving the public. Some do it because they see that it's their duty to protect those weaker and more vulnerable in society. And that's an honorable thing. Some do it because they just want a paycheck and a pension, and they see that as one of the easiest paths and aren't too concerned with the other things. Some may even do it for more nefarious reasons. So what does this have to do with you in interaction with police? Again, give honor to whom honor is due. You honor the position that they're in, the badge that they have. Know that if you have a problem with something a police officer is doing and you think that it's not legal or not right, the place to take that up is in court. It's not fighting the police officer in the street or arguing with them. The proper place that you're supposed to take that up is in a courtroom with a judge. I don't play video games, and I'm not super familiar with the game Grand Theft Auto, but I've heard that, the more you do and the more you try and evade police, the more police come and show up, and then eventually, like the military, the National Guard comes out. You're not going to win a fight with cops. You may win a small battle against an individual police officer, but they're just going to keep calling in more police and more police and more resources. That's not going to change whether you are right or wrong or whether the police officer is right or wrong. And the more you go down that road, the worse that's going to get. Know this, as I was a cop. Cops are not there to fight fair. Their job is to take people into custody and enforce law. They're supposed to do one level of force above what you can do. If you're just non-compliant, they use physical force and restraint. If you're actively resisting, like with your hands and feet, they use tools like batons, like mace. Go to something like a baton, they go to something like a firearm. Their job is not to fight fair and go toe-to-toe with you. Their job, again, is to enforce law and if need to, take you into custody. So understand that. You're not to fight a police officer in the street, even if you know that they're wrong. You take that up in court. Doesn't mean that what they're doing is right or wrong. Just because you cooperate does not mean that you agree or what they're doing is right. Likewise, being polite, being courteous, just like when you're arguing with somebody. You can disagree with somebody, state your point, while still being polite and respectful and making your point. And again, police are people just like you and me. Some have better control of their tempers than others, and you don't know what cop you're dealing with. So, generally the best course of action is being polite, being courteous, and then taking it up in court. When we see things go wrong in traffic stops or pedestrian stops or knocking on somebody's door or something like this, this generally happens when people are not polite, they're not courteous, and they don't follow lawful instruction. If a police officer has made the determination that they are going to detain you, at that point he's going to detain you. And even if it's not warranted at the time, understand that it's not the police officer's job to determine whether you are guilty or innocent. That lies with the judge. That is not his authority. His authority is that there is probable cause. Think that you may be guilty of something or may need to be detained. He's decided that's going to happen. You fighting that, you resisting that, mouthing off, it is not going to help. You're just going to call in more and more authority, more and more force until that happens. Let's shift gears a little bit, and I encourage you to know your rights as a citizen. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, commonly referred to as the Bill of Rights. Now, the last two probably won't apply. They might apply to you if you go to court, but they won't generally apply to you when you interact with a police officer. But the first ones, the first 8 may. The freedom of speech. The second, the right to keep and bear arms. The third really doesn't apply much anymore. Fourth, this one is big. Fourth has to do with the rights of search and seizure. We'll get into that more later, but the rights of search and seizure. And the fifth, the right against self-incrimination. Sixth, the right to a speedy and fair trial. The right to a trial by jury, that's 7. Freedom from excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment. Notice I told you to be polite to police officers. I never told you to do everything they ask or everything they want. There are some exceptions that you are granted by our Constitution, by our Bill of Rights. Again, for actual legal advice, go to a lawyer. But I know this, especially as being a police officer. There's an acronym called SPICE, and this is when a police officer can search you, getting back to that Fourth Amendment, the right to search and seizure. There are instances where a police officer is lawfully allowed to search you. Those are a search warrant issued by a judge, probable cause, incident to arrest, consent, and exigent circumstances. The only one of those that you have control over, as opposed to the police officer, is consent. My advice to you, even if you don't think you've done anything wrong, even if you think you're completely in the right, if an officer asks if he can ever search your car, your home, your domicile, your vehicle, your purse, your backpack, is to say no. If he says, "Can I search?" you say no. Very clearly, not wishy-washy. Don't be afraid to tell the police officer no. Be polite. Say, "No, sir. No, ma'am. No." Don't be afraid to say no. It's a question. The police officer is trying to obtain consent. If you grant consent, then all the other stuff doesn't even need to be there. Because you granted consent, you've given them permission to your stuff. And they will likely try to get in there if you say no the first time. Say something like, "Do you have something to hide? Why won't you let me search your stuff?" And they are trying to obtain consent. Again, say no. You can even go as far as to say, "No, sir, I do not give you consent." Or what they try to do not give them consent. Again, that gives them pretty much carte blanche. Without consent, they need one of the other things. I don't want to go too in depth and make this a law study, but probable cause. Let's say you're swerving all over the road and get into a head-on collision with another car. The police officer sees all this, sees you stagger out of the vehicle holding a bottle of Jack Daniels. Now, he probably has probable cause to assume that you're drunk driving. That's probable cause. Incident to arrest. He's already determined that you are going to be placed under arrest. He's going to search you so that you don't have a weapon on you or something and you shoot him in the back of the police car, have a knife and stab him. If he's going to arrest you, then he has the right to search you. And then exigent circumstances. Let's say that a police officer is chasing a suspect, jumping over, let's say 6-foot chain link fences in the city, and he jumps over a chain link fence and it happens to be in your yard. You happen to have an entire acre of marijuana plants in your backyard, a state where marijuana is illegal. Well, exigent circumstances, he had another lawful reason for being in your backyard. So that's an exigent circumstance. If he sees that crime, he will not just ignore it. But again, the only thing that you have control over is the consent. He says, can he search? No. Now realize, he may search anyway. It's generally standard police practice to ask for consent even if they have something else, because it's a lot easier to prove. Harder to prove probable cause in a lot of cases than just consent. Again, if you say yes, then they don't need anything else. If you say no, and later in court they determined there was no probable cause or one of the other circumstances, everything obtained after that is fruit of a poisonous tree, and in general is not admissible in court. Which means it can't generally be used as evidence. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I served in enough trials and went to court enough times. And I went through the LAPD Police Academy and graduated, which at the time I believe was the longest police academy in the country. It may or may not still be. It was 8 months at the time. And a big chunk of that was studying law. So be polite, be respectful. But my best advice is if they ever ask for consent, can I search this or can I do this, say no. Now they may do it anyway because they have another reason or another justification, but you don't need to grant consent. That's never going to help you. As long as you're polite, it shouldn't make the police officer angry because you won't grant consent. They try and guilt you into it. Doesn't matter how. If you grant consent, you've granted consent. So don't. Let me tell you a little story. Shortly after I was a police officer, I was a professional firearms instructor, and I traveled all up and down New England. Now, I had to drive through, or I was doing a conference in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts sucks. I don't know any other way to put it, but it's horrible as far as gun laws and personal freedom. If you live there, my best advice is move. I know that's easier said than done because I did it. I moved from California. That's a big reason. Not the only reason. There were some personal reasons, some things I didn't agree with being a police officer, but that's probably a whole nother show for another time. I was asked to do things that I really didn't agree with. The big reason was to get out of California, and I tried to rationalize it, but in the end, I just didn't want to stay in a place that didn't honor personal freedom. Massachusetts is such a place. And I knew that a lot of things are illegal in Massachusetts. So before I went down to this conference, I took guns out of my car. I took ammo out of my car. I searched. I did all kinds of stuff. I had a concealed carry permit for the state I was in. It wasn't going to matter in Massachusetts. So I tried my best to abide by all those laws. And I did the whole conference and everything. And I went back that night. And my EDC knife was a Gerber 06 Auto. An automatic knife. It was a felony. Not by any... I tried my best to get all the things that I don't think should be illegal, but are illegal in Massachusetts, off of me. But I forgot a simple pocket knife. And that would have been a felony. I got into some weird thing. I'd gone the wrong way on a one-way street because I'm not from that city, and I don't know anything about the city where I'm in, or I got lost or turned around, or say I just missed a stop sign. It happens. And I'd gotten pulled over, and the cop said, "Can I search you?" And I had said yes. I would have been a felon. And in general, police don't have discretion over felonies. Whether he believed me or not, whether he agreed with it or not, he would have probably had to arrest me on a felony. And I would have indeed been guilty of that. For just a little teeny push-button knife that was in my pocket. Really no more dangerous than any other knife. Or let's get into a hypothetical that's very plausible. Let's say that you love your grandma and you drive your grandma to church and to the pharmacy. once a month, once a week. She comes to visit, whatever. And one of the times she leaves her bag that she gets from the pharmacy in your car. Who knows, your grandma's on 6 different medications. One of those is probably a class 3 narcotic. The police officer asks if they can search your car, and they search and they find that bottle of pills. It's a class 3 narcotic, and it's not going to have your name on it. It's not prescribed to you. You are now in commission of a felony. You knew it or not, doesn't matter. And now that may get thrown out. The DA may decide not to prosecute that, but you're going to spend a lot of time and probably a lot of money trying to get out of that. Or if they ask and they search your vehicle and you just say no, then it is what it is. Again, this is nothing underhanded. This is your constitutional right. You are guaranteed this right by the U.S. Constitution. The right against unreasonable search and seizure. They can't search you without one of these things. And if they do, that stuff will be thrown out in court because they didn't have a lawful reason. They didn't have the SPICE, the search warrant, probable cause, incident to arrest, consent, or exigent circumstances. My best advice, if they ever ask if they can search anything, no. And be polite about it. No, sir, you cannot. Let's get into a little bit more specific traffic stops. My best advice from being a police officer and doing a lot of traffic stops, especially working places like, Southeast, Southwest, LA, Newton Division, some of the nastiest places, nastiest streets in LA, and being a little on guard when I pull people over for obvious reasons. Hands are important. What you do with your hands. Police officers are trained. The hands are what kill you. So when you're talking to somebody, when you pull somebody over, you watch their hands. If they're going for a weapon, we're humans in general, unless you roundhouse kick somebody in the head and kill them, you kill with the hands. Your hands are what grab guns, knives. You're trained as a police officer to look and pay attention to the hands. I actually caught myself doing this today, and I haven't been a cop for a long time, but I saw somebody that I wasn't real sure about, and I immediately was watching their hands. So what this means for you as a citizen, when you get pulled over, keep your hands where the cop can see them. Keep them on the steering wheel, keep them visible on the dashboard. If you have to move your hands for some reason, let the police officer know that's what you are going to do and make sure that he acknowledges it. For instance, when he walks up, have your hands on the steering wheel. Have them on the dashboard where he can see them. He says, "Do you have your registration?" You say, "Yes, sir," or "Ma'am. It's in the glove box. Do you mind if I reach for it?" Wait for him to say, "No, go ahead," and then you reach for it. If a cop walks up to the car and you're immediately rummaging underneath your seat or in the glove box, you may just be looking for your registration, but to him, what does that look like? He doesn't know what you're looking for. You're reaching for something, and he has to deduce by the totality of the circumstances what that thing you're reaching for is. So don't reach for anything without getting his acknowledgement and buy-in first. Especially if it's like underneath the seat. Say, "Yes, it is, but it's underneath the seat. Do you mind if I reach for it?" He may say no, especially if he doesn't care about the registration. He just wants to see whether he thinks you're doing something else nefarious. He may just say no. Don't worry about it. Have a nice day. You might be driving a black Honda Civic and he might be looking for a specific felon in a black Honda Civic. He's not going to waste his time with a traffic ticket. He just pulled you over. You have no idea why. He walks up to the car and you don't match the description. He's going to say, "No, have a nice day." Again, keep your hands where he can see them. Those are the dangerous things. Again, it's going to make that officer feel a lot better and probably calm him down a lot more. Again, you don't know what kind of temper or whatever else. That cop just could have had a horrible day. His wife could be leaving him. He could have just pulled over a nasty felon and been in a hand-to-hand combat just before that. He'd still be amped up. He's human. It happens. It's going to help if you keep your hands where he can see them. And again, be polite. Even if you disagree with why he pulled you over, even if you think you didn't do anything wrong. Again, the time and place to bring that up is in court. Not arguing with him on the side of the road. That's not going to end well for anybody. Know this, that almost all departments nowadays have, we call it an MBT and LAPD, but it's a little laptop. And when they run your plate or run your license, they're going to know a lot of information about you. You can be polite and not answer every question that's asked. Let's say that your tags are suspended. You forgot to go to the DMV, whatever, you've been out of the country, you were deployed overseas, you came back, and you're, for whatever reason, Sunday, the DMV is closed and you're driving around in your car and he pulls you over and says, do you know that your vehicle registration is expired? Well, if you say yes, and when you go to court, he can say, well, he admitted he knew that his registration was expired and he was driving on it. Or you could say, is that correct, officer? Well, I'll have to make sure I get that fixed. Very polite, but you didn't admit any guilt. And again, you're guaranteed by the Constitution. That's your Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination. You never have to testify against yourself. That is a right granted to you. I'm not telling you to lie. I'm just telling you to not incriminate yourself. Those are two very different things. If you're an alpha male, if you listen long enough, I believe you should be carrying a weapon. You should be carrying a handgun. If you're, any farther than the mailbox going out, if you're any farther than a few feet away from a long gun, you should be carrying a handgun, in my opinion. Which means you're probably going to have a handgun on you if you get pulled over. Now, I might give some advice that some others wouldn't. If that guy runs your plate, he probably knows that you have a CCW. He's paying attention. He'll probably ask you when he comes up to the window. But I wouldn't volunteer that information. Unless you live in a state where it's mandated. Some states mandate. And again, this is why you should take classes and be familiar with these things. You may get some other advice from some other professional firearms instructors, and that's fine. Do what you think is prudent. Some states require you to identify that you have a handgun on you or have a firearm. Some do not. If they do not, then I would not volunteer the information. Again, don't lie. He says, I see that you have a concealed carry handgun or a concealed carry permit. Do you have a weapon on you? You say the truth, whatever that is. It's not incriminating because you're not breaking the law. You have a permit to have that gun. At that point, answer truthfully. Like I said, cops are people just like anybody else. Some are gun people, some love guns. Some can't stand guns. Some dare say, even though they carry one, are even afraid of guns. They have that job for the money, for the pension, because it offers them good benefits. They see the handgun rather as a tool that they have to do that job. And that's it. They shoot when they have to qual, and that's about it. And there are cops like that. And they don't like guns, and the fact that you have a gun they may or may not like or agree with. All that being said, if your state requires that you identify that you have a firearm, then you obviously should do that because the state requires that. But if you don't, I wouldn't volunteer the information. You tell them that you have a handgun. From that point, like we've discussed before, you comply with any lawful order. And again, I worry to keep your hands where you can see them. If he asks, do you have a handgun on you, don't immediately say yes and then grab for it. That's idiotic. Wherever your hands are at the time, when he asks you that, put your hands on the steering wheel or put them on the dash and say, yes, I do. And then, again, don't volunteer any more information than is necessary. You say, whatever, it's on my strong side hip. And again, don't reach for it. He may or may not ask you to step out of the car. Usually, most police officers won't. They'll say, okay, that's great. Have a nice day. Unless they're going to arrest you anyway, they're probably not going to have you do anything else. But if they ask you to step out of the car, then step out of the car. If you're out of the car and the weapon's on you, if they ask again, can we search your vehicle? Say no. And then again, be polite and comply with all lawful orders. I'll reiterate again that a lot of police officers are not gun people. They may have only ever handled a Glock and .40 caliber. They may know almost nothing else about other guns. You'd think police get a lot of handgun training or a lot of firearms training, but they generally don't. Most police officers are not gunfighters. We do a whole nother podcast called Gunfighter Life, and I know this firsthand. One of my jobs, one of my more specialized assignments, as I talk about that I mentioned, was as a police armorer and a police firearms instructor. I'm an FBI certified firearms instructor, and I'm here to tell you that most cops are not gunfighters. Avid shooter, and especially your average good competition shooter, is far and away more competent with a weapon than your average police officer is. Just on average. There are some cops that are very good shooters, some cops that do competition shooting, and some cops that take that part of their job very seriously, but they don't all. So don't ever assume that cop knows how to clear your weapon. He probably knows how to be safe and clear and handle his weapon. But if you have a 1911 and he has a Glock, he may have no idea how to even get the slide back on that gun. He may not know that he has to take the safety off to pull the slide back. He may never have handled the gun with a safety. So keep things like this in mind. Be polite, be helpful. And again, arguing with police and fighting with police, even if you're in the right, even if you're in the right to begin with, battery on a police officer is a crime. Again, the place to take up your cause, to plead your case, not with that cop on the side of the road or at your front door, is in a court of law. Talking about granting consent to search, there's also granting consent to enter your domicile, to enter your place of dwelling. And they may have another reason, but if they ever ask, can we come in? Say no. I'll talk to you right here. There's no reason for that cop to be in your home as far as you granting consent. He may have another reason. He may have gotten a call of domestic violence. He may have the wrong address, but he doesn't know that. He may come in anyway. But again, you granting consent, I don't think is ever a good thing. So if they ever ask if they can come in, say no. I'll talk to you right here. Got a call of a domestic disturbance or something like that, they may have to come in and check that everybody's okay. But they're going to do that anyway, whether or not they get consent. But I don't know that it's ever a good idea for you to grant consent to the police to search or enter. So to reiterate that point. And again, the big point of this is cops are people too. There's good ones and there's bad ones. There's cops who do it for good reasons and noble reasons and want to help the most vulnerable and weakest among us and have a true sense of justice and right and wrong and good, strong morals. And there are some that don't. You honor the badge, you honor the position, you be polite, you be courteous. And most cops, most of the time, will react accordingly. Well, I hope this episode has been helpful to you, has been maybe eye-opening for you, maybe helped you see police officers and maybe your constitutional rights in a different light. If you thought this content or any of the other episodes or podcasts that we do was worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo or a fancy city cup of coffee or anything like that, I hope that you'll consider supporting the podcast because it's free for you to listen to, but it's not free to produce and put out. So please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com, checking out the Patreon link on there. There's some cool stuff on there. If you don't want to just give because you think the content's worth it, which is the number one reason I want you to give, because you see value in it and you want to help other young men be strong young men, especially for this, the Alpha Male Podcast. There's also some cool insider chats you can be a part of if you're a Patreon. We talk about all kinds of stuff and topics on there. And it's not just me, like, lecturing. It is an interaction. And a lot of people on there know a lot of things. A lot of them know more about topics than I do. And that's great. We're iron sharpening iron. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. That's just a small virtual tribe where we get together and do that. And that's just one small perk of Patreon. There's some insider content on there. Anything from a snare kit back from when I was a professional hunter and trapper, of things to carry when you're professionally trapping animals or trapping animals for food or fur or whatever. That's just one thing on there. You know, different pictures of things that are in my bug out bag or baby bug out bag or things like that. Again, that's all available on Patreon. You can give as little as $1 and be part of that. There's also some merchandise available on goodshepherdtraining.com. We have some really good, very utilitarian alpha male mugs on there. Kettles you can cook on them, boil water in them. Some cool shirts on there. And I don't often mention it, but we're also on Instagram. You can check out Good Shepherd Training on Instagram if you just want to like that and be a part of that and see more visual stuff. With that, I'm going to throw in the tactical tip of the day as a thanks for staying tuned all the way till the end. Heard that some people, this is like one of the favorite parts of the show, so I'll throw in the tactical tip for today. This one's going to be a gun one, and I used this way back in Iraq. A long time ago when we first got issued ACOGs. My first tour we had just iron-sighted M16A2s way back when the war started, and later on we had an optic and ACOG. Well, the tactical tip of the day, most of us have that odd sock. We probably have a couple of odd socks, a full-length one, a small one, whatever. Make sure it's clean and washed, but if you have that odd sock and it's been a couple cycles and you haven't found the partner to it, those make pretty good covers for optics, protecting glass, keeping dust and dirt out. They're not the best, but they work pretty good. Range finders, taking that old, tube sock that's a single, wash it again, make sure it's clean. Don't put, your rangefinder nasty, sweaty gym sock. Put a good clean sock. You put your rangefinder in there, you may or may not tie a knot in it, but that's going to keep it when it's bouncing around in your range bag, hopefully from getting bumped and destroyed and scratched. Same thing with a sock, like I did in Iraq. I like to you think we had all this high-speed gear. I took one of my socks, I cut a slit in the bottom of it. I took my sewing kit, as every good Marine has, and I sewed it up. Yes, Marines can sew, or at least good Marines. Most Marines can sew. And I sewed it up nice and pretty so that it slipped on my ACOG, my Advanced Combat Optical Gun Sight. And I had a sock on there, and it kept the dust out, it kept the moon dust out, the dirt out, and all I had to do is when I was coming up to the shoulder to fire the weapon, I just rip it off as I was bringing my non-firing hand up to the fore end of the gun. So those old spare socks, they're good for a lot of things. You can use for cleaning and cutting them into patches and cleaning your guns, but they make good covers for your optics. I'm going to throw in another tactical tip that I used as a professional hunter. Rubber gloves. If you're doing the kind of hunting that I do, where you're like maybe sometimes literally crawling on your hands and your knees, getting dirty, getting wet, getting muddy, getting dusty, taking a finger of a glove, especially just like a thin latex glove, and putting one of those fingers on the muzzle of your gun to keep dust and dirt and debris and rocks out if you ever drop your gun, which I've dropped more guns than I can remember. I broke a SIG 226 earlier this week. I train hard, I hunt hard, I shoot hard by God's grace. They're tools. If you're out hunting and you get dirt and mud, especially in your muzzle, it can be dangerous to fire that gun. That glove fingertip on there can really keep that out. And if you fire the gun, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to blow off the gun. It's a good way to keep crap out of your muzzle, especially in adverse conditions. So there's your 2 tactical tips for the day. And again, if you thought those were worth $1, worth anything, consider going and supporting on Patreon. That's going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day, the most important part of the show. If you don't know, there's a whole other podcast, the flagship podcast that started all the others. It's called Simple Man Sermons, and they're straight up sermons. This is the instructions given to the priests to speak to the men before a battle. You'll find this in Deuteronomy chapter 20. It's one of the roles of a priest is get men ready for battle. This is the Alpha Male podcast after all. The officer shall speak further to the people and say, "What man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him return to his house, lest the heart of his brethren faint like his heart." Fear. Fear is like a disease. It spreads. Better to have that coward just go home. More of a liability than an asset is a coward in battle. And again, fear is like a disease. He who is fearful and faint-hearted, let him return to his house. Battle is not the place of a coward. You'll find that passage in Deuteronomy chapter 20. With that, men, thank you for listening. Be strong and prove yourself a man, and have a blessed day. Just a quick postscript. A sincere thank you to all the patrons, especially on this episode, Pat and Steve. They actually came up with the idea. I forget who first, but we talked about this on the Patreon discussion group. And this episode I don't think would have come about, especially not right now, without their contribution. So again, a sincere thank you to Pat and Steve. I really appreciate you guys.